Abs Unfiltered. I'm your host, Blain, and I'm joined now by my co-host, Trege Wilson. What's up, yo?
Nothing much changed since the checks notes 5 minutes we were just recording.
Yeah, we're trying to pump out as many shows as we can while we have the time. Trege's very busy lifting things. I'm busy working. Matt, well, he's off being a hero overseas.
To Thursday, I started a half-day French course, so I'm going to be busy doing French homework.
Bonne chance.
Oui, je parle français un peu, comprends bien, écrit. Can never get the
Me too.
Asante, Goose, and Gras correct.
I have a hard time with my kids' homework.
They're French immersion, I assume, are they?
Mine, yeah. I can't grasp that Acadian stuff that they talk. Just doesn't feel right. I know my family's freaked out by it. Just so different.
Technically, you should all be speaking English. It's just they didn't have enough English people in Quebec at the time to force the law, so they just let them go. According to my nephew, who told me the history of it, and,
Yeah.
he lives in northern Quebec, so he would know. I'm sure some old man in a bar somewhere said, "Let me tell you,
He's living in hiding up north,
them
away from the
English
authorities.
bastards, they'll never take our culture."
Didn't he move up there because he owed some loan shark money?
Who, my nephew?
Sure.
I'll say yes. I don't know what story you're going with this, but I'll say
I
yes.
don't know.
The old man that's probably yelling at him did.
True.
His,
He's
his
the
name
cloud running away from the old man.
his name is Legault. I don't know. It's weird.
So if you're looking for him, there you go. All right. So this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about the Kent Hughes uh, press conference on Monday and some issues with the roster that's going to be coming up from injuries, return from injuries, yada, yada, yada. So before we get into that, there's been some discussion today. It's Tuesday, the 16th, as we record. And there's some back and forth about Michkov being a generational talent, and the Canadiens wasted their opportunity to draft him and just flushed their pick away and picked Reinbacher.
Okay. I take a lot of heat for this because I don't get passionate about it. Anyway, I don't think he's a generational talent. I don't think he is at all. I mean,
He's
people
not.
say, "Oh, he's doing things at 19 in the KHL that no other 19." Well, of course he is. He's playing 18 minutes a game when Ovi, Kucherov, and Malkin only got like 9 to 10, 12 minutes a game, right? I want to see the point per 60. Give me the point per 60 on those guys back in the KHL when they were there, and the point per 60 of Michkov. So if we're going to do the analytical thing, because it's mostly analytical people that are arguing Michkov's generational, show me that stat. If his point per 60 is better than theirs, sure. You convinced me. You just convinced me that this guy is going to be a generational talent. I don't think he's going to be a bust. I don't think he's going to be a bad player in the NHL. The reason I say this is he's 5'10 and he has below average skating. Okay.
And shit defense.
And shit to no defense. And yes, I've watched full games, not probably not as many as some other people have, but I have watched full games of him playing in the KHL. Yes, he's on a terrible team, and yes, he's the best player on that team. Uh, yes, he battled pneumonia, but he didn't play when he had pneumonia. So the excuse of "oh, he had pneumonia when he was playing" is not true because he didn't play. Um, but yeah, so here's a guy in the KHL which is not as good of a league as it used to be due to the war and people leaving and whole teams leaving and it being a little bit watered down.
I
Um,
would say it's even below the SHL.
I would say SHL and Liga, but that's just me.
Possible.
Um, um, so what I thing about Michkov. So I think Michkov's going to be good. I think he's going to do well in the NHL. I don't think he like people think, and I don't compare him to Reinbacher because they're two totally different players playing two
And
totally
different
different positions.
positions.
Who's going
Yeah.
to come up with two totally different metrics? So you can't compare the two. You can't say, well, Michkov's going to be better than Reinbacher. Point wise, he should be, because if he's not, then yes, Michkov was a bust. And to sit there and say, well, if you're picking this guy over 5, he better be the best defenseman in the league. Why? Why does he have to be the best defenseman in the league? Many defensemen were picked in the top 5 that became great top 4 or top 2 defenders, but weren't necessarily the best defenseman in the league, right? But when
Right.
it comes to Michkov, if Michkov gets to the NHL, I think he's going to be an average over his career 30 goal scorer type guy. Depending on his coach, if he has Torts, I think he's going to have a hard fucking time playing because he won't play defense and Torts won't put up with that. But that's 3 years away. We don't even know if Torts is going to be there. I will also say if he has a really, really good center and a really talented offensive center, he could hit the 100 point. He could. He very could. Because
Sure.
I believe Michkov is one of those wingers. He has all the skill in the world in offense. He has a great shot. He has, I'm not his hockey IQ in the offensive zone is off the charts. But I just think there's so much hype on him to be this generational guy. Actually, Prongman in the Athletics said he's not generational. He's in tier 3 of the players under 22. He was number 6
Yeah.
overall, but he's a border bubble elite NHL All-Star is what he has him.
Sure. Sure. Okay.
Sure, sure.
But and here's you're talking about him being a 100-point player, which I agree it's possible based on the scenarios that you mentioned. But at the
Yep.
same time, unless he can figure out how to play defense, he'll be one of the few 100-point players to be a negative player.
Yes, but if he doesn't learn how to play defense, and I'm just listen.
He won't stay long.
I'm talking about the style of the NHL. Like
That's right.
let's bring this over. If he doesn't play, and everyone says, "Oh well, who cares about his defense if he has all this offensive talent?" The coaches in the NHL care about his defense because if he's playing on the top line, guess who he's playing against? The other team's top line. And if you're not playing defense, that other team's top line is going to scorch you. So right then and there, he's probably not playing top line minutes.
That's right.
There's a reason that the SKA wasn't playing him, and it had a lot to do with how he played defense.
But he's only 18. They don't have any 18-year-olds on their team except for that one.
Demidov. But actually, he's not on the team anymore. He's out of the NHL now. So,
Well, still,
but
he
he
made the
did
team.
get the minute. He did get the minutes over Michkov at the time
Yep.
Michkov was there. So,
And Demidov is let me just double check that. Uh, yes, it's coming in now. The mission control has just passed on that. Yes, Demidov is a 2024 eligible draftee,
I like
but he's
Demidov.
younger.
I think Demidov's going to be a better overall player than Michkov, if you ask me.
I can see, yeah,
If I
yeah,
give my opinion on it, and by overall I mean 2 way. I don't think Demidov isn't super great in the defensive zone, but he isn't
as a winger, he's
Michkov.
passable.
He isn't Michkov. Michkov, as a
Yeah,
matter of fact, the VHL, Michkov never even played defense. He didn't even go back there.
and I know that the argument on the defensive side is going to be, well, you don't need to play defense if you have the puck all the time. But I counter in the NHL against top lines, you're not going to have the puck all the time. No one's that good.
Especially if he's a below average skater at 5'10". One who loves
True.
to play in the center of the ice and one who loves to play in the dirty areas.
Yeah. Well, who was it? It was Emlyn last year. Just clipped him when he was cutting to the middle. And Emlyn was known for his big hits in the NHL. And Emlyn wasn't anything spectacular at the NHL level either. There were players that were way meaner, way tougher, way worse. And that exists today. So he's going to have to learn how to play in traffic, how to play defense, work on his skating, and that can all happen in 3 years. I mean, he's not going to be back. He's not going to be in the NHL for 3 years.
It can, but from what I've read, from reports I read, his skating hasn't gotten better since U18.
Well, no, but I mean, it could. Like he could work
It
on it in the
it could.
summers, and yeah,
It could, and like I say, I get everyone Michkov, but there's a reason, and it wasn't just his contract that 5 teams passed on him.
true. And back to the generational tag, I agree. It is absolutely not deserved. Uh, if he was a generational player, there would have been all kinds of talk about the Bedard Michkov draft, like there was prior to,
Correct. And
but disappeared.
after the U18 tournament, which he dominated, I'm not going to deny
Yeah.
that. The one in Texas, I believe it was in, uh, he was actually better than Bedard. And the talk was there. Oh, Bedard might not be the consensus first overall pick. But what happened after that is it quickly went, Michkov won't go any higher than 5. So it didn't go from could he go to, it went from he won't go any higher than 5.
Exactly. And that's why I think the generational tag is undeserved. Because if he really was a generational player, it would have been a slam dunk, no doubt pick at 2. Instead, it went to Carlson and
Yeah.
then Fantilli and then Smith, then Reinbacher. And I'll even argue that Michkov wasn't even the first Russian picked. If you want to say, oh, it's a Russian factor, he wasn't even the first Russian pick. Simashev to Arizona was the first Russian, a defenseman.
Granted, I'll play devil's advocate. Arizona wanted a defenseman, and everyone knew Arizona was going to pick a defenseman.
True. But if he was a generational talent and he had slipped that far, you'd think a team would trip over themselves to get there.
I think if it was generational, he would have went first or second. There would have been an argument, like the Wright Slavkovsky argument, on who was going to go first overall. It wouldn't have been clear cut Bedard if he was. And then the argument for him going second would be, well, teams don't want to wait 3 years to get their generational talent. Chicago doesn't want to wait 3 years to get the generational talent. And the second overall pick would have said, fuck. I think it was Anaheim. With Anaheim at the second pick
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
Carlson. Anaheim has 3 years. They're not going to do anything in 3 years. Same with San Jose. Same with who picked third?
Columbus.
Columbus. They're not going to do anything in 3 years, so they have the time to wait for him to come over.
And both teams were looking for scoring in the draft. So that
Exactly.
brings me back to it's not the Russian factor because a Russian was picked before him anyway. It's all the points you mentioned before. These question marks about his actual on ice play, and then there were question marks about his attitude. Now, I think they're kind of overblown, but Bobrov is Russian. He knows a lot of people in that league, and he gets information from them. So if he heard some bad news out of the KHL about the attitude, I get it. Do I think they would have
Bob
picked him?
Bobrov does have a certain type of player that he likes, and it's not a
That
5'10"
is
player.
true.
So I'm not. I don't think he really has an attitude. I'll be honest. I don't think the attitude is a real big
Oh,
thing.
and that's what I was getting to.
Yeah,
I don't
I
think it
think
was. I think it
I
was what you mentioned was the size issue.
yeah, I think he did have teams he preferred to play for over other teams. I think Montreal was a team, and of course, our friends Habs fan TV or Habs TV or whatever they call themselves now. They were talking
HFTV
to him
now.
at the draft, HFTV. They were talking about the draft, and he said he has no issue with Montreal. He doesn't, he has no issue Montreal drafting. I think he wanted Philly.
Sure.
Sure,
Like
and that's fine.
he's not a Cutter Gauthier, so he wanted to go to Philly
Well, Cutter Gauthier apparently wanted Philly too, so let's not even go there.
until they had that first date.
Yeah. So again, like, and I say, people might say, "Oh, well, Treg, you're being wishy-washy." Now, I'm not being wishy-washy. I'm just trying to be realistic. Yes, there's a chance Michkov's going to come in and score 100 points, but the only way that's happening is if he has a center that's going to be if it's like a Matthews Marner type situation where he has a center
There's
who's just
just
as
as
good
good
as he is.
exactly, and there's just as good a chance he shows up and he becomes the next Nail Yakupov.
I I think it's not going to go that far, but I mean, I would say this, and people are going to shit on me. I think he's closer to a Cole Caulfield than he is to a generational talent. And I only say
Yeah.
that because of I think he's going to probably no, actually they could probably get the same amount of points in the same situation. So I think Caulfield could be a 70, 80 point scorer in the right situation when Montreal
And
gets their shit together.
if anyone listening goes back to the episodes that we put out when Matt and I were in Nashville, you'll hear both of us talk about Caulfield already being on the roster, so they don't need to get Michkov because they already have the Michkov type player in Caulfield. So it makes sense on that end. Do you really think you're going to do well when you have on your top line two sub 6 foot players? One's 5'8", one's 5'10", and then you got a 5'11" center. Is that? I know size shouldn't matter; it should be about skill. But in the NHL today, size still matters. You need some of it on that line.
I
Like
think
look
you
how it's
could.
doing now.
I think you would. Well, I mean, yeah. I don't think Montreal. I don't want to say Montreal didn't consider Michkov because they had to have, but I think Montreal's direction they wanted to build the back end first. They're like, okay, we just need
Sure.
one more defenseman to finish up our defense for the future. We need him to be a right-hander, and Reinbacher was there. Now the argument will be: is Reinbacher the best defenseman out of this draft in the next draft? Because you could very easily go, okay, well, if you wanted that high-end right-handed defenseman, why didn't you just pick Nemec first overall the year before? Because defensemen and goalies take longer to develop. Why didn't you pick him? And then you could have picked a Leonard, a Benson, or a Michkov at 5 but they didn't know where they would be sitting in 2023 when the draft came. They didn't know where they'd be drafting. So they went with who they thought was the best player because, they know they need skill. They know they need talent. I think Hughes just thinks he can get it through the free agent or a trade on the wing.
I Yeah, I think the trade market is where he's looking.
Yeah.
I was bringing up the top line as a segue to not only how they draft, but really, yeah, no, it's about how they draft. So they got Slavkovsky, the big power forward, who on the top line now is starting to show why he was picked, where he was picked. Granted, it was a weaker draft year. No, whatever. But they picked him for those skill sets. And you look at the impact that uh, a big right-handed defenseman can have across the NHL, and Reinbacher fits a lot of those, I guess, specialties, the little skill sets that you need. And when Hughes was asked in his press conference on Monday, why not go for Michkov? Well, he said, well, we weren't sure we wanted it. Like essentially, he's basically saying, I'm paraphrasing, that they just wanted Reinbacher. They liked him better, and they weren't too sure about the defenseman in this draft class being any better than him.
And that's what you got to look at. So, I mean, with Reinbacher, you also have to look at you have a guy now who's defensively responsible. He has upside to his offense. Mind you, he's playing on a terrible fucking Colton team. Um,
True.
and and he's going to get paired with Lane Hudson. There's no question about that. Him and Lane Hudson are going to get paired up. And this is the guy, and I always compare this. This is the Markov Subban matchup of this generation, because I don't think, mind you, I don't think Reinbacher's probably going to score as many points as Markov could score, and I don't think he's going to run the power play like Markov could run a power play. But he's going to give Lane Hudson the freedom to do Lane Hudson things and not have to worry so much defensively. And one thing I'll say about Lane Hudson, everyone said, "Oh, well, Lane Hudson's not a very good defender." If you watch the World Junior Championships and you're still saying Lane Hudson's not a very good defender, then you didn't actually watch the World Junior Championships, because Lane Hudson's
You watch his
defense was
game,
on display.
and I'm not going to say it's perfect, but you watch his defensive game last season, and you watch it this season. There is a marked difference. Like you
Yeah.
mentioned, the World Juniors, he was impressive in the World Juniors, and defensively, he was strong. Why else would his coach play him as the most minutes on the team
he
and get named to the top defenseman in the tournament.
he played the PK, he played the power play, and he played, he played everything. And you don't put
Played
a guy
everything.
like that. You don't put a guy like that on PK if you don't think his defense is good enough for that. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying Lane Hutson's going to come out and become this 80-point
No,
to a friggin' defenseman. But what I'm saying is, if you pair him with a guy like Reinbacher, and Reinbacher hits his ceiling, which I think is maybe 40 points, but plays that solid defensive game, which allows Hudson, I'm going to pinch in. Don't worry about it. Reinbacher's back there, right? He can pinch in, even if it was a bad pinch. He has nothing really to worry about because he has that. PK Subban was allowed to do his thing because he had Markov and Josh Georges. He knew he had Markov and Josh Georges to cover his ass. Because we have to admit, PK Subban, and I'll admit, I was one of those guys who had blinders and thought he was the greatest defenseman that ever lived with the Montreal Canadiens. And then I actually watched little things near the before he got traded. I was like, oh, he's not that great defensively. Uh, so that's what I think is going to happen. And I think Lane Hutson's going to be the next Adam Fox. And I think Montreal had the gem there.
I think they did get a gem. I'm not saying that he's the next Adam Fox or the next Quinn Hughes. Um,
Yeah,
there's a
he's going to be better
possibility
than
he gets
all of them.
there's a possibility he gets up towards that end of the spectrum, sure, but the bottom end for him is more of a Torrey Krug, and I'm gonna be honest, it's not a bad defenseman. You pick this guy at the end of the second round, and you get a 40 to 50 point defenseman who can be a solid defensively. That's a great pick.
That
Like
is a
you look
great
at the
pick. And then you get Reinbacher, who ends up being maybe a 35 point defenseman
yeah,
who's responsible defensively. What's wrong with that? What's
highly
wrong with that?
mobile, excellent on the transition, and
And
that's where the
now,
offense is going now.
are you going to argue, but he was a fifth overall pick? Who cares? Johnson on Colorado was a third overall pick. Are they complaining? No, they're not. He's a good, solid defenseman.
They're complaining about his cap hit, not his play. That's
Okay, sure. Yeah, but let's keep it
that's
simple,
my
Blaine.
point. It's not the play that they're bitching about.
Right.
They want that
So,
kind of player.
I mean, hey, if Hughes and them really think Reinbacher was the bad pick, you have yourself a great asset to go get that talented winger that everyone's dying for him to go get. End of story.
True.
It's not
And
gonna happen, but whatever.
the pairing that you'd mentioned, the new Markov Subban pairing, Hudson and Reinbacher, we might actually see that at the end of this season.
It's possible. Now depends on how Hudson does in the Frozen Four, because if that
That's
you
right.
might only get a game or two out of Hudson. Same with Fowler, depending on how far Boston College goes. But
I don't think Fowler will be signed, but yeah.
I don't think true. Yes, sorry, I forgot all about that. But Fowler, I think, will be signed after next season. Um,
Yeah,
I think he's only going to do the 2 seasons. That's just my point of view.
possible.
Hudson Hughes has already alluded to the fact that I think Hudson's going to be signed at the end of the season. He kind of hinted on
Hughes
it,
has flat out said he wants to sign him to play at the end of this season.
right? And Hudson kind of on Grant McKegg's little show there, kind of wore the Montreal Canadiens shirt, and you
Yeah.
know,
He's
indirectly.
he hasn't been shy in saying he wants to sign with Montreal as
Right.
soon as possible.
So depending on how long the Frozen Four goes, you'll probably see him. I would, in all honesty, I would get Reinbacher out of Colton as fast as I could. But I think they want him to finish the season there because I think he wants to finish the season there, which shows dedication. Um, and then you'll either see him in Laval. I think you'll see him in Montreal for at least a game or two, just to see what he can do.
Quite possible.
Yeah.
Now, the next part of Hughes's press conference, he for a guy who didn't say very much, he was talking a lot. Like you can tell he's a lawyer.
Well, and that's what politicians and lawyers do. They talk a lot without really
Exactly.
saying anything. And what do you expect? Do you expect them to say, you know what? We really need to get rid of one of these goalies, and we really need this high-end scoring offenseman, and we really don't have the talent on our team that we need to go further. No.
Well, they're not going to. No GM is going to tell you his plan, even if his plan is frigging obvious. It's clear the Canadians need more scoring, and I see online, some people on X and Facebook, they say, well, it's obvious that he needs scoring. So if I was the other GM, I would just fleece him for everything. Well, that's not how that works either. Just because you know they need something, you're not going to be able to fleece him for that. One, he won't pay the stupid price, and some other GM would take whatever he's willing to offer. And two, what GM's going to work with you after that? Really?
Well, and not just that, but no GM's going to sit here and say, this team sucks. You know, we really need to make major moves to improve this team. Of course, he even said it. I
Well, he
kind of
kind of
didn't like.
did.
I didn't like the way he went. Uh, you don't need. You can win with a player like Bergeron, who wasn't a point per game player. By the way, he was one season. Um, but then he
I think
said
he was.
Bergeron
Yeah,
makes everyone else around him a point per game player. But I think what he was
sure.
alluding to was Bergeron wasn't a point per game player, but he was good enough that he made everyone around him better. And that's the type of
Allowed them to
player
be. Yeah,
allowed them to be
yeah.
better. And that's the type of player that wins you championships. That's what he was trying to say. So in a
And
roundabout way, he wasn't saying we didn't need scorers. He's saying if I could get a team that has a bunch of Bergerons or someone like people like, I don't need the point per game player because they're going to make each other point per game players.
but here's the thing: he's already got one. Nick
Suzuki.
Suzuki plays a style similar to Bergeron. I'm not saying he's anywhere near as good or you know anything like that. Just he plays that two-way centerman style. Will he get a Selkie trophy? Suzuki will probably win one in his career, I would think. Will he be a first ballot Hall of Famer? No.
I saw a chart not too long ago saying he's actually in the up there for the Selkie vote, the Selkie metrics or
Yeah,
whatever the fuck. I don't know.
sure. But that brings me back to the fact that the Canadians do need some scoring,
They do.
and Hughes in the press conference kind of alluded to that as well. And then when he was asked about, you know, what about the logjam of draft picks and how are you gonna fix that? And he said, well, we have 22 picks over the next 2 years. In a perfect world, we're not going to use them all. And what we've done in the past, we've used some to get Kirby Doc, Alex Newhook, and as we continue to move forward, we'll have more financial flexibility in the cap to evaluate things. So basically, he's telling you right then and there, we're going to use some of our draft picks and prospects probably to go and get that. So you talked about he's going out on the trade market. He just said it. He didn't actually come out and say, I'm going on the trade market. But I mean, come on.
I mean, he got 3 first-round picks in the next 2 seasons, possibly 4 if he gets a first-round pick at the trade deadline. Um, he has 3 second-round picks. He has 4 third-round picks, and this is only over the next 2 seasons. So, and the D prospects that he has that could all potentially be top 4D, they're all not going to be on the team. Right now, I look at Harris and I look at Barron, and I think you're weighing which one you're keeping personally. Um, so Hughes has the assets, and I think he said in an earlier press conference once, it's easier to draft top centers and defensemen, but it's easier to trade for a top winger. And he's not wrong.
Yes, that's true.
He's not wrong because there's twice as many wingers as there are centers. Out there. For every center, you have 2 wingers, right? And the thing is, though, I think he has to go away from the new hooks and the docks and get the sure thing. I'm not saying Newhook and Doc won't be a sure thing. I think Doc will be if he can stay healthy. The book's still open for me on Newhook, but he has to go away from the this guy looks like a project and that guy looks like I think we can turn things around.
Yeah. Yeah.
To we already know what this guy can do. Trevor Zegras, a guy like Trevor Zegras or something like that. I'm not saying they're going to get Trevor Zegras. It's a possibility.
But you're someone who's proven, someone you know what they're going
Someone
to
is
bring.
proven. You know what they're going to bring. You know, if Patterson's going to be a free agent at the end of Elias Patterson. I mean, he said financial flexibility. I think he's willing to go over that $8 million too that he gave Suzuki and Caulfield if he can get the over $8 million type player.
Yeah. What about like a Cole Eiserman? Like the Canadians still have that top 10 pick. Who knows?
Well,
Cole Eiserman can
I,
slide down. Demidov could slide down. Berkeley Catton, Sam Dickinson. Uh, there's a bunch of really good players that could slide down.
plus with a draft where there's a lot of teams probably going to pick defensemen up with the top picks, that gives you more of a chance to get that forward. Right now, I think they're drafted 7 or 8. I didn't really look at
7
the
right now.
standing. Yeah, 7. So they could win the lotto. They could get friggin' Celebrini.
Celebrini. Yep.
Who's best friends with Hudson. Um, you could, or they could, even at 7, you're going to get. No, I mean, and you know what? I would argue. I don't know if this draft is any worse than last year's draft or any better. I don't know. There's no. I mean, Celebrini is the clear #1 pick, but I don't think he's at the level that Connor Bedard was at. But
No, but there's a lot of good talent.
Other than that, the talent after that, I don't think it's much worse than any of the forward talent that was picked last year in the top 10. So
No,
you never know. You never know. Because everyone's saying, "Oh, it's a bit of a weak draft." I don't think it's as weak as people think it is.
really.
So
You look at the top 10, and you can easily put 5 or 6 forwards in there, but you can just as easily put 5 or 6 defensemen in there. So there's going to be right now, there's a lot of volatility. We're not 100% sure how things are going to fall out. There's a lot of time left, but the Canadians could easily get a quality forward with that draft pick. And then they still have 21 others that they can trade off to get that surefire player that you were talking about.
that Calgary pick, if Calgary starts selling everything away, is going to be a top 10 pick, and it's only #1 pick protected. So they could dangle that pick around anyone and say, all right, well, we got this pick.
Yeah.
If Calgary finishes in the bottom 10, or if Florida finishes in, oh no,
There's a lot of what ifs.
I'll have to go back to my article. Some of them have cleared up by now. It's between Florida and Calgary now. So Philadelphia is out of the picture. So it's between Florida and Calgary now. So it depends on what happens there. And I don't think Florida is going to fall to the point where that pick's going to be relevant. So
there's a lot of possibility that that's going to be a very good pick. Again, they can trade their own damn pick and keep that one. There's so many things they can do and still get that surefire player and pick a great player in this draft.
They could sit there and go, you can have the best of our pick or the Calgary pick.
True. And I would argue that because this is part of a rebuild, that this very well likely could have been part of an overall plan, an overarching plan. They didn't have specific names or types of players in mind, but they thought, okay, well, we're going to be missing a couple of things, like 1 or 2 types of player, and we're going to have all kinds of draft picks that we can use to get what we need. And we're going to have assets that we can trade from the depth that we've already had. It's not something they just happened to drop in on. This is not a fantasy team. They just, look what we found.
Yeah.
There's some planning involved.
There is. And he's always said, I'm looking for the team, the best players in the next 5 years. So I think his plan is multiple years, not just, this is my plan this year, this year, this year. This is our plan to get here at this year.
All right. Well, we don't have a lot of time left. So I'm just going to give you what are your final thoughts?
My final thoughts is Canadians are going to finish exactly where we all thought they were going to finish with 80 or some odd points. Luckily for them, other that 80 points isn't going to have them as high in the standings as we thought they were. I figured they'd be between 10 and 15. It looks like they're between 5 and 10 because they're really not moving up or down on the scale. And if they do move up, it's only a spot, and then a loss, they drop down one or two spots. So, my final thought is just enjoy the games, enjoy what's going on. Yes, they didn't pitch Michkov. Get over it. Move on, because really, there's nothing you can do about it.
It's over.
It's over. It's done. I didn't want Reinbacher either. That's all I'm saying. But guess what? We got him now. I wanted
I was
Leonard.
thinking Leonard. Yeah. Whatever.
Or Zach Benson. But whatever.
Um, yeah. So, I mean, for me, I just, again, as I always do, want to thank everyone for tuning in. Thank you for listening. Um, keep listening. There's a lot of other really good podcasts out there, and I'm really happy to know that, yeah, well, sure, there's some, but I'm happy to know that a lot of people have us in that rotation with them. So thank you very much for that. Keep listening to other podcasts, coming back to us, listening to our to the two goofballs just throwing shit against the wall, seeing what sticks.
We don't even
Depends on what kind
believe
of
what
poop.
we say.
Or do we? Maybe we do. Maybe we don't.
Grant McKegg writes our script. Kidding. I'm kidding.
Maybe.
I'm kidding.
Or is it Tony Marinero?
Could be.
So again, I just want to thank everyone for tuning in and listening. And remember, if you're talking about it,